Good evening, I'm Katerina Georgieva. Here's what's making news right now.
I am sorry. I ask forgiveness in particular for the ways in which many members of the church and of religious communities cooperated, not least through their indifference, in projects of cultural destruction.
We continue to pursue on all fronts to make sure that we are made whole. At the end of the day, it would be completely unfair for residents of the City of Windsor to shoulder the burden for a national economic emergency.
Ontario's education's plan to help students catch up is focused on 5 key pillars, and it is anchored by the first, which is keeping students in class.
Thanks for joining us. We'll have coverage on the Pope's historic apology in just a moment. But first, the City of Windsor is still on the hook for the millions of dollars it spent during the Ambassador Bridge blockade in February. The protest stalled billions in trade and was called a national economic crisis. Today, Windsor's mayor says he's still hopeful the city will be reimbursed for bringing it to an end. The CBC's Jason Vio joins us live now from near the bridge with more. Jason, what's the latest?
Well, it's radio silence from the federal government. Those are the words used by the mayor's office to describe their attempts to get some money to repay some of the expenses they incurred in trying to get the blockade to come to a resolution and maintain what was the flow of traffic here as well. They've been trying to get upper levels of government to pay the $5.6 million bill, but it's been 5 months since the blockade here at the Ambassador Bridge, and that hasn't happened. It took more than 500 police officers from outside of Windsor to help bring an end to the Ambassador Bridge blockade back in February. That's in addition to the hundreds of local police officers who were here too. And that didn't come cheap. The bulk of the $5.6 million bill is police overtime pay. That cost $2.5 million.
The City of Windsor needs to be made whole because the taxpayers here should not be shouldering that burden.
Another big chunk of that burden, $1.3 million for those concrete jersey barriers. Dilkin says those needed to be brought in from all over Ontario to keep protesters out. And another $1 million was spent to put those outside officers in hotels and keep them fed.
Our federal government needs to step forward and recognize that this was a national economic emergency for which our city responded in the national economic interests of our country. This was an atypical municipal event, and we need to be made whole for the actions that were taken.
In an email to CBC News, a spokesperson for Canada's Minister of Public Safety says, "We know that the policing costs associated with these illegal blockades are a significant burden on many municipalities, including Windsor. We continue to work closely with the City of Windsor, Windsor Police, and an array of other partners, including conversations to discuss how the federal government can best support them." The spokesperson wouldn't say why these conversations are taking several months or how much Windsor may be entitled to. Meanwhile, a spokesperson in the office of the Provincial Ministry of Finance tells CBC News the OPP didn't bill Windsor for its officers or equipment, and they say Ontario does not directly fund or reimburse municipalities for local policing. Dilkin says neither level of government made any promise of reimbursement up front. Windsor responded, as he says, was required. Now, we did hear back from both the provincial and federal governments about funding, and they weren't very specific about any money that could be coming Windsor's way in that regard. And we did ask the mayor today again how much he did expect from each, the provincial and federal levels of government. And in his words, he says he doesn't care where the money comes from or how they divvy it up, as long as the $5.6 million bill does not fall at the feet of Windsor taxpayers.
Thanks for this, Jason. CBC's Jason Vio live from near the border tonight. Pope Francis uttered the words today that so many survivors of residential schools and their families have been waiting to hear. I am sorry. The CBC's Olivia Stefanovich was there for the historic moment and sends this report.
An act of repentance. The head of the Roman Catholic Church praying over the graves of generations, lives cut short by its institutions. Then at the grounds of the former school, where the church's abuse ran rampant and unchecked.
It is a blessing to receive and host you.
Pope Francis sought atonement by 4 teepees representing the 4 nations of Masquachis, and a 5th symbolizing the entrance to the residential school that once stood.
you have traveled a long way to be with us on our land and to walk with us on the path of reconciliation.
The very culture that the church tried to destroy on full display, along with the names of more than 4,000 children who either died or never returned from residential schools.
I have come to your native lands to tell you in person of my sorrow, to implore God's forgiveness, healing, and reconciliation.
Pope Francis apologized for the ways in which Christians supported colonizing mentality and forced assimilation. But as in Rome, he did not apologize for the role of the Catholic Church as an institution. He spoke of the actions of members and communities.
I am deeply sorry. I humbly beg forgiveness for the evil committed by so many Christians against the indigenous peoples.
But begging pardon is not enough, something the Pope acknowledged.
An important part of this process will be to conduct a serious investigation into the facts of what took place in the past and to assist the survivors of the residential schools to experience healing from the traumas they suffered.
Along with an apology, Pope Francis returned the moccasins given to him by residential school survivors and indigenous leaders in Rome, a pledge from him to continue walking the path toward reconciliation. Olivia Stefanovic, CBC News, Maskwacis.
In Windsor, the city's Indigenous storyteller spoke about her parents who were residential school survivors. They are not alive today, but she told CBC News that they had wanted an apology.
My mom told me about the first day at residential school. She was only 5 years old. She couldn't speak English. Her dad couldn't come with her because he couldn't speak English. So he could never visit because he didn't have the language to speak. So the first day they put a broom over the well. They grabbed this little 5-year-old. And she was suspended over this water. And she could not come out until they would not pick her up until she said please and thank you in English. That was her first lesson. So my mom was always terrified of water. And you can understand why. That trauma started right at that instant. So she became a very good student. You know, she did whatever they wanted as fast as she could because she remembers the torture. And with this apology happening, I wish my mom could have heard the apology. I wish all those children could have come home. I wish that they could have healed more, and they could have had time with their parents to learn about that unconditional love that was there. No one believed us until now. They're starting to believe us, which is good. Finally, people believe us.
Another person we spoke with today says the Pope's trip to Canada is an important first step, but meaningful action is needed moving forward.
I feel angry that it's just now coming to an apology. I'm thankful that it's happened, but, you know, asking for our forgiveness, thank you. But what is next in his plan? Forgiveness. Some may say you need to give it to move on and to heal. I think that right now, if there's a meaningful plan of action, that for me and forgiveness will probably come a lot easier and sooner.
A national Indian residential school crisis line has been set up to provide support for residential school survivors and others affected. People can access emotional and crisis referral services 24 hours a day at 1-866-925-4419. The Minister of Education promises students will be staying in the classroom this September. The announcement is part of the government's plan to help students catch up after 2 years of learning disruptions due to COVID-19. Talia Ricci has the details.
We are committed to keeping kids in school.
Ontario's education minister says that's the most important part of the government's plan to help students catch up.
I met with the Children's Health Coalition, which represents all pediatric hospitals, including sick kids, and their message was clear. We've got to do everything possible to keep these kids in school, which is exactly what our intention is, starting on time with the full student experience.
The plan announced today also includes additional tutoring supports to fill gaps in learning, preparing students for the job market, providing more money to build schools, and offering students mental health supports.
Looking back over the past 2 years, I think one of the biggest mistakes that we made from a public health standpoint was taking kids out of school.
During the pandemic, Ontario students were cumulatively out of in-person classes longer than students in any other jurisdiction in North America. This infectious diseases physician says the virus isn't making people as sick anymore.
Also, now that we have vaccines available for kids all the way down to 6 months of age, I think we have all the tools that we have even for the people that are still worried about it, we have tools to keep kids safe.
Most of the funding for the different elements in the province's plan today were previously announced by the government in the spring budget. The opposition NDP said it wanted to hear about more increases in the education budget today.
Teachers and education workers are actually being laid off in some parts of our province. Our kids' class sizes are far too big and growing. Children still aren't getting anywhere near enough support for their mental health. And some teachers and education workers are even leaving their profession because they're feeling disrespected by this government.
Stephen Lecce's announcement comes during ongoing labor negotiations with educators. He said he expects classes to start on time and with extracurricular activities. The union that represents custodians and early childhood educators says fair wages are key.
I think the key piece for us is that wages and services are directly linked. We need to ensure that the wages are adequate to get the staff that provide the services that our students so desperately need. But this will be collaborative. We need to be at the table and we need to be talking.
Lecce says he's confident a deal with the unions will be reached. Those contracts are set to expire on August 31st. Talia Ricci, CBC News, Toronto.
Canada's Innovation Minister, executives with Rogers, and officials with the CRTC were on the hot seat today. Members of the Commons Industry Committee were questioning them about the massive Rogers system outage earlier this month. CBC's Marina von Stackelberg reports.
Rogers Communications CEO Tony Staffieri grilled for an hour over his company's failure.
Would you agree that the services you provide are an essential service in this regard?
We fully appreciate the reliance that Canadians have on our network, and that's why we focus very much, not just on this outage, but how do we fix this going forward?
As a massive provider, the Rogers outage left 12 million customers without cell or internet service. And the number of Canadians impacted in the future could be even higher, as Rogers tries to merge with its rival Shaw.
They have alternative and they have choice.
Wait, you think Canadians have alternative and choice in this marketplace?
Very much so.
And you're saying that with a straight face?
The committee learned today that Rogers didn't inform the government when its network had crashed.
It should not be to the minister to chase the CEO of a major telco in Canada when something like that happened. It should rather be the other way around.
Champagne has demanded Canada's telecoms make a plan to mutually help each other out in a future network crash. But MPs aren't sure what teeth that will have if telecoms don't follow through.
When the Minister of Industry speaks to them, they do ask them to testify.
They didn't even call you.
It's unclear how many emergency calls couldn't be made on Rogers phones. Canada's telecoms regulator knows how many, but the public doesn't. That number has been redacted.
We had procedures in place to ensure that 911 and emergency essential services would switch over to an alternate carrier's network. For very specific technical reasons, that automatic transfer did not happen.
The head of the CRTC says they've barely begun their investigation.
But this was unprecedented, and we now need to focus on how do we assure in this type of situation emergency services are connected.
Some MPs would like to see a wireless customer's bill of rights, similar like the one for airline passengers. Canada's industry minister is promising that this is just the first step to prevent a similar outage from happening again. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, Ottawa.
Joni Mitchell surprised fans yesterday at the Newport Folk Festival by performing a full set. It's her first in more than 20 years.
rose and flows of angel hair, and ice cream castles in the air, and feather canyons everywhere. I've looked at clouds that way.
Love that song. The Canadian singer-songwriter joined Brandi Carlile on stage, and the duo sang several Mitchell classics, including this one, of course, Both Sides Now. Mitchell hasn't been seen in public much since suffering a brain aneurysm in 2015. She was honored as MusiCare's Person of the Year at this year's Grammy weekend. And as we go to break, let's listen in to some more of the legendary Joni Mitchell, and when we come back, we'll have your weather.
I've looked at clouds from both sides now, from up and down, and still somehow it's clouds.
Kim McDonald joins us now for a look at our weather forecast. And Kim, I'm excited to say that for the first time in several days, there's no heat warning in effect.
Can you believe it? How does it feel? Can you open
It
the
feels-
windows a little bit? Let the
We
AC
can finally breathe a
take
little bit
break?
more. It's nice.
Man, the hair gets a little break as well. We've had high humidity, and it's finally nice. And the reason why, we had a big old cold front move through. Cold front being the leading edge of cooler, fresher air. Sometimes it doesn't bring in a lot of cool air this time of year, but it did, which is good news. It came along with some supercell thunderstorms, unfortunately, but we didn't see them in Windsor. So this is the 14-day trend. We've just had 7 days in a row of 30 plus. And for the first time in a long time, we saw temperatures in the 20s. So daytime high normally around 28 degrees in Windsor. We had about 26 on our Monday, 27 for Tuesday, but we can see we're right back up in the 30s in the 14-day trend. Another at least 10 days of 30 plus coming, but not just yet. So overnight, we're looking at temperatures dropping to about 16. That's going to feel cool enough for sleeping. Last night, Sunday night, it was 21. So yes, things have really changed. Tuesday morning, 18 degrees, mix of sun and clouds. Calm weather for at least a couple of days. By Wednesday, things are going to change. So big old ridge of high pressure, just rolling through it, just like this graphic, off it goes. But we do have another cold front coming in, and this could fire up a few thunderstorms in southwestern Ontario. So there's potential overnight Tuesday into Wednesday that we could have a few thunderstorms, which is pretty typical. But there you go, Tuesday afternoon, 28 degrees, 27 in Chatham and Leamington. It'll feel like 31, so that's not particularly sticky. We've had it a lot more humid than that. And taking a look at our long-range forecast here, so calm for Tuesday. That cold front comes in. There's another look at those thunderstorms moving in. And yep, it'll be hit and miss as they roll across Lake Erie. Not terrible, but thunderstorms nonetheless. Watch for that high UV. It is 9 again for Tuesday. Slap on the sunscreen. 9 is considered on the dangerous side. Again, precautions required. It's extra high. And there goes that cold front that triggered the storms yesterday. High pressure in place. Long range forecast, not too bad. Wednesday's our only chance of seeing thunderstorms for now.
Thanks so much for that, Kim.
You're welcome.
And when we come back, we have some international updates out of Myanmar and Russia. Stay with us. Welcome back. The military government in Myanmar has executed 4 democracy activists. The killings have triggered outrage and condemnation from around the world.
This is a horrific situation. It, I think, is a demonstration to all of us that there are no limits to the depths of depravity of this military junta.
The executions led to street protests. The military, which seized power in a coup last year, has very limited support among the population of Myanmar. The 4 activists were accused of helping carry out so-called terror acts and helping militias fight the military. The 4 were sentenced to death in closed-door trials in January and April, and they are the first executions in Myanmar in decades. Russia is cutting its natural gas deliveries to Europe to just 20% of the pipeline capacity. The Russian gas giant Gazprom is quoting problems with the equipment, specifically a gas turbine that was recently serviced in Canada. Germany is rejecting that explanation, accusing Russia once again of trying to sow uncertainty and push up energy prices. Back to Canada now. A Catholic archdiocese in Ontario has denied a request from parishioners to contribute proceeds of the sale of a church to residential school survivors. St. Margaret Mary Catholic Church sits in central Ottawa. It's now on the market, and the archdiocese says it has other plans in terms of contributing to Indigenous communities. The CBC's Julie Ireton has the story.
I was married in the church.
Missy Fraser attended St. Margaret Mary Catholic Church in Ottawa for decades. The century-old building has sat empty for the past few years. Now it's for sale, and it's prime real estate. After the discovery of unmarked graves at Catholic-run residential schools, Fraser and other former parishioners approached the local archdiocese.
There was a movement together for people to approach the archdiocese through a letter asking that the proceeds of the sale of the church be directed towards reconciliation and residential school survivors.
About 70 former parishioners asked for a significant portion of the proceeds, up to $3 million, be donated.
Local families built this church out of their pockets, going door to door, putting $5, $10 in a bucket, enough to buy a church, enough to buy a school, and that church was transferred to the archdiocese in trust. So again, you could say that the archdiocese perhaps doesn't belong to them.
The Archdiocese of Ottawa-Cornwall has different plans.
Our real estate is separate from the Indigenous funds, so we are contributing to Indigenous projects and funds, but these two things are two separate.
It's been a difficult time to be a Catholic.
Erin Kinsella is part of a grassroots group called Catholics for Truth and Reconciliation. It's encouraging the institution and its followers to contribute money and make change.
Because it was institutional decisions in a large sense that were responsible for religious orders being present in schools and even with decisions since that time in terms of reconciliation and healing. So there is absolutely a responsibility.
The Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops says it will put $30 million into initiatives for residential school survivors.
The Archdiocese of Ottawa-Cornwall plans to contribute $1.2 million to the Bishop's Fund, but that money won't come from real estate sales. It will be raised by going back to the community for donations. Julie Ireton, CBC News, Ottawa.
Lifeguards at some Spanish beaches are getting help from above. What we're talking about is drones. One was used to save a life earlier this month. A 14-year-old boy was found struggling against powerful tides off a beach in Valencia. The rescuers managed to quickly fly a drone over the teen and drop him a life vest, allowing him to stay afloat until help arrived. Despite being on jet skis, the lifeguards say the heavy waves made it tough to get to him any sooner. The drone service has been rolled out to 22 beaches across Spain. More than 30 have been working with local lifeguard services. That is it for CBC Windsor News. For news anytime, you can go to our website at cbc.ca/Windsor. That's where you can find our latest coverage on the blockade of funding, as well as the latest on the Pope's apology as well. Thanks for watching and have a great night.